Thank you for inviting me to speak today on this hugely important topic. Legal & General is a company that manages $1.2 trillion of long-term institutional slow money. Europe we think of as a great place to live. It should be a great place to invest. Indeed, 25% of EU members are ranked amongst the top 20 best places to live on Earth, based on a happiness ranking. That's a tremendous achievement. I see financial regulation as being a key contributor to this. The question we now need to ask is, how do we boost this to 50% or 75% through much more proactive regulation? I do not underestimate the challenge for our regulators. We're in a period of transition as government and regulation moves from an analog world to a digital world. Until very recently, we've been solving yesterday's problems. In a digital economy with digital money, we have a zero world. Interest rates are zero. Inflation is zero. Real wage growth is zero. Economic growth is zero. Indeed, if growth is our objective, we are collectively failing our citizens. To support the work regulators do, I would suggest 3 tests that regulators should undertake when regulating. They are, first, supporting sustainable growth in the economy, creating a competitive and dynamic landscape for the financial services industry, and deliver positive and fair outcomes for customers. Let's start with growth and competitiveness, where prudential regulation plays a key role. The present Commission's approach is refreshingly pragmatic. I'm very encouraged and very supportive by what I've seen so far. Jean-Claude Juncker, Jyrki Katainen, and Jonathan Hill are amongst those who recognise that 7 or 8 years on from the great financial crisis, the biggest threat to stability is the lack of growth. I fully agree. A number of ingredients are needed to deliver this growth. Capital Markets Union is clearly one ingredient. We need to learn from the US and reduce our over-reliance in Europe on bank finance. Compared with the US, medium-sized companies receive 5 times more funding from capital markets than they do in the EU. We have starved our economy of equity capital and filled it full of tax-advantaged debt. But we need to do this alongside the Commissioner's $315 billion stimulus plan and the ECB's $1 trillion QE programme. QE is strong monetary methadone, but it results in defensive outcomes. It keeps the economy alive, but it does not lend itself to a growth strategy. One of the characteristics of QE in the US and the UK is that it tends to bid up the price of existing traded assets, rather than helping to create new assets, such as infrastructure investment, SME funding, and startup equity. QE was designed by the rich, for the rich. It helps the 1%, not the 99%. That is why CMU has to be deployed in parallel. Jonathan Hill's exciting recent announcement on securitization give a clear and helpful direction. We now need real focus on private placements and non-bank financing for mid-cap and growth companies. I see this every week through the activity of Pemberton Asset Management at L&G's pan-European SME non-bank institutional financing vehicle. It's now 500 million startup. The world is awash with liquidity, but it's a tsunami of money, which is not the right conditions for industry. The instruments for lending need to be simpler, and the use of non-bank institutional funding has to become mainstream activity for growth companies. But what more does regulation need to do? As a priority, we need to create better access to equity financing. The world is over-leveraged. We need to look at California to see a really effective model in action, where equity is recycled from large tech stocks to startups and growth companies. Apple, Google, Amazon, eBay, Facebook, they've all been created in America. We have no EU equivalents. The origin of this success, however, was positive government intervention. for example, in the defence industry and its links with Xerox and Hewlett-Packard. We urgently need a Commission workstation to free up equity markets. It would contribute to the jobs and productive growth agenda without costing the Finance Ministry's assent. Legal & General is really willing to help. Perhaps the quickest wins and those with the greatest long-term effects are in infrastructure funding and finance for regeneration. The EU-wide insurance and pension industry manages 12 trillion of assets. So small reallocation of assets will make a big difference. We need to reduce our reliance on outsourcing to China and look towards ourselves for solutions. My company is showing the way with around 10 billion of direct long-term investment, up to 50 years, so far in housing, infrastructure, clean energy, and urban regeneration, with particular focus on regional cities, Leeds, Salford, Manchester, Cardiff, Bracknell. There is scope for a pan-European drive to deploy institutional funds in this way across all member states, from Latvia to Portugal, bringing jobs and growth across the Union, not just in the UK. The economic multiplier from physical infrastructure investment is estimated at around 3 to 1. €1 invested gives €3 of economic benefit. Digital infrastructure investment has a much, much higher multiple, between 10 and 20 times. The photograph on your slide pack is of Media City in the UK, one of our investments. Over 200 startups have been created in Media City. Our challenge, which we're all currently failing to achieve, is to make these startups grown-ups. To do this, Legal & General's second key reform for regulation would be to persuade prudential regulators to arrive at more accurate, realistic calibrations of risk for assets of this type. We've argued for many years, in the context of Solvency II, that this needs to change. After several frustrating years, it is really encouraging to see IOPA's work on the definition of infrastructure under the Solvency II standard formula. What is really encouraging is Jonathan Hill's recent comments in Eurofi in Luxembourg that, in effect, the Commission will request a broader recalibration of Solvency II. This needs to address issues, including the fundamental spread, within what is called the matching adjustment, as well as something called the risk margin, which is a totally flawed and unnecessary concept. And it needs to be driven down through national supervisors, as Peter just said, to achieve maximum harmonisation. We need more encouragement for financing, and for that financing to finance growth. The results could be historic in terms of unlocking investment and growth in the EU. We could be talking trillions of euros, not just billions. So in my view, prudential regulation in the EU is moving in the right direction and should be applauded and encouraged. But what about conduct regulation? Customer protection and cross-border access have historically been central to the EU's conduct regulation agenda and will continue to be so, and rightly, as the whole conduct framework evolves. On this, I want to offer a couple of more forward-looking observations. Firstly, Europe, as we know it, has an ageing population. This is deflationary. Long-term savings and pensions will be crucial, so we need to ensure that there is a simple and effective pensions framework, both through regulation, such as IOPS and IOPA's work on pan-European pensions, and the wider EU conduct package. There is a definite move towards greater personal accountability and freedom, in particular towards defined contribution, DC, savings models. The state is stepping back. The EU has 7% of the world's population, around 20% of global GDP, but 50% of global social spending. That is unaffordable. Secondly, there's a shift away from longevity risk on the part of companies and employers, a de-risking trend. This is very pronounced in the US and the UK and in other jurisdictions with a history of defined benefit pension schemes like Holland. Details vary from country to country, but this is in global terms a $10 trillion market. The direction of travel is clear, and all EU companies will need to tackle the issue of longevity risk and pension liabilities to be globally competitive. Third, the world and our customers are also becoming more digital, but financial conduct regulators often remain stuck in the analog age. The recent completion of the Insurance Distribution Directive moved away from just using the sensible phrase durable medium to a higher focus on the word paper. This, to me, reflects an approach to regulation which doesn't yet focus enough on the smartphone generation or fully embrace the concept of a digital single market. Equally, better financial inclusion, enhanced household resilience, and better pricing for customers all depend on harnessing digital technology. Telematics or black boxes in cars, or wristwatches for motor or health cover, robo-advice to help deliver affordable financial planning, and transactions via mobile phones or across the Internet of Things. These are challenges which fundamentally change conduct regulation. Therefore, Legal & General want to see an approach to conduct regulation is one that recognises the substantial demographic shift to individual responsibility that every member state is facing. There are no easy answers, and as I said at the beginning, I don't underestimate the complexity of the issues faced by regulators. But one of the most powerful aspects of the new approach by the Juncker Commission has been its emphasis on fixing legislation that is broken, rather than more legislation, which has only incremental benefit and which may not be necessary. This pause in the legislative process creates an opportunity for real constructive collaboration on some of these big issues. There are huge opportunities for the financial services industry to step up in terms of social and economic usefulness for consumers and for the broader economy. I look forward to working with the EU institutions as we develop these solutions.